Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you'd like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. On today's episode, Tanya Roberts joins us to discuss how meditation can work for us as autistic people. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Tanya, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Hi, Doug. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'd love to start out our conversation by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is interesting backstory. I mean, I would say at birth, because I assume have been autistic since birth, but I was never really aware of these differences until later in life, much later in life than I would have, liked. It would have been good to know younger, but here we are. So I'd say that I always felt a little bit different growing up, feeling, even though I grew into a pretty social person as a child, I remember being kind of confused about social interactions. And so I would just stay quiet. That was my strategy. If I don't say anything, I can't say the wrong thing. And I remember just feeling overwhelmed all the time, in the classroom, being terrified of being called on, just kind of sitting there frozen, not absorbing any information, which probably wasn't ideal. And, having various sensory sensitivities. I remember never doing imaginary play. I didn't know until I had kids that was, a typical milestone. So for years, I just thought I was, sensitive or anxious until kind of fast forward into my early adulthood. And I reached a bit of a metaphorical boiling over point. And my first tech marketing job, I was working in this, big open concept office. And just obviously the really, the worst environment for me. There's kind of a constant flow of caffeine, deadlines, lots of socializing on my lunch break after work. I was never really getting any downtime. And then I would come home and have roommates and never feel like I could sort of disconnect. So I started having daily panic attacks and not just one, multiple. And I was masking those in meetings. When I was having meetings, that's when they came up at, face-to-face meetings. And I remember I was doing the breath work, trying to calm myself down and masking really hard. So I went to a therapist, trying to figure this out. What's going on? Why am I so anxious? And they did all the typical things like, let's look at your childhood trauma and all these things, which is the good thing to do. But no one put the pieces together and figured out, okay, a lot of this stuff is social and sensory differences and sort of processing the world in a different way. No, none of the therapists I saw figured that out, which I think at the time there's less awareness on autism and I'm a woman. So, masking and all that, they just thought I was anxious. So I tried, meditation, things like that, exercise, that all helped. The exercise helped quite a bit. The meditation helped a bit, but I found it to be really difficult, to sit still and mind, all those things. So I kind of gave that up. I gave the meditation up for years. And then later in life, after I've had kids, people in my family started getting diagnosed as ADHD and autistic. And I started looking at myself and thinking, I can relate to, a lot of those traits. I started looking into, finding specialists in neurodivergent women, which is a whole thing. You need to sometimes find someone who can understand female presentation of neurodivergence. So I found someone, we went through, the assessment process and I was diagnosed as autistic and ADHD. And that changed a lot. Had a lot of kind of imposter syndrome at first because no one believed me because I think I present as typical to a lot of people. I'm a high masking person. And yeah, that's where it all began. And then over the, last 3 years since I learned I was autistic, I've been kind of developing my own community of supportive people. And that's where I felt like I started to really shine and really believe that I'm neurodivergent. The more I interacted with other autistic and ADHD people, the more secure I felt in my own identity and the more supported I felt. Like I wish I knew that sooner. But anyways, I've answered your question. I went on a bit of a side question.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned we were talking about meditation, how maybe that didn't initially work for you. Now, present day, you guide people through meditation practices. From what I understand, your guidance acknowledges that traditional meditation doesn't work for a lot of neurodivergent brains. How do you think meditation looks and might feel different for us as neurodivergent people?
Yeah, fair. And to be clear, I mean, traditional meditation might work for some neurodivergent people, but everyone's different. And that I think depends on attention differences, how busy the mind is. But I mean, don't quote me on this stat, but I think it's something to do with synaptic pruning. I think our brains are 40% more active at rest. So, traditional mindfulness teachers talk about the monkey mind. But for us, it feels more like the gorilla mind, a monkey mind on steroids. And if you sit still and close your eyes, that can be a little bit disconcerting for some people, particularly people with trauma, which us neurodivergents are more likely to have. So I think there's a lot of things that don't work in traditional mindfulness practices for us. For PDAers, people with persistent desire for autonomy, I call it, instructions can feel like a nervous system threat. And there's also sitting still and being expected to pay attention to your thoughts for a long period of time that might feel a little bit out of reach for a person who's just starting meditation. So there's that. And I think the idea of sitting still when our bodies feel like they need to move. So there are meditation practices you can do where you integrate, movement, fidgeting, art, sensory play, and sound. And that's sort of my technique to help kind of meet your sensory needs as you're going and as you're doing the meditation versus just being expected to sit perfectly still. And some traditional mindfulness practices do integrate movement, things like walking meditations. And my favorite meditation teacher, Yogi Mingyur Rinpoche, he's a Buddhist monk. He actually has panic attacks. And I really love this guy because he's very approachable and relatable. And he just observes the anxiety and kind of relates to it in a different way. But he calls this anywhere, anytime meditation that you can meditate when you're walking, when you're sitting, when you're doing dishes. And I like that sort of free range meditation. And, for traditional sitting practices, just integrating movement into that. So, for example, every 2 minutes or so in my meditations, I have fidgeting and movement breaks, and you can move however you want, jump, spin, rock, you know, circle, sway, whatever you need to do to kind of get that sensory input into your body so that your brain is able to focus on what's coming next, focusing on the meditation. So that's sort of my approach, a little bit different, a little bit traditional, I would say.
And I'm curious because, well, one, I'll say stimming is self care, and things like art can be really helpful as well. So, when in meditation, a lot of times you're supposed to be present and not be moving and those types of things. What kind of results have you seen with like fidgeting and art and sensory play and all that?
So it results in my personal life or the people that I teach?
People that you teach.
Okay. Yeah. So some feedback I've gotten is that it's easier than other meditation practices they've tried. So other meditation practices felt really too difficult to the point that the person couldn't even try it. Okay. So say someone has a knee injury, they wouldn't go to the gym and do a whole bunch of squats. They would put a knee brace on. And equally, was your first time at the gym and you had that knee injury, you wouldn't expect to have an ass like Beyonce after one squat. It's kind of a two-pronged approach for me. First, explaining the subtext of meditation, the things that are not that neurotypicals infer that we aren't outwardly overtly told, such as you don't need to have a perfectly still mind, that it's normal to have racing thoughts, or I guess I shouldn't use the word normal. It's expected to have racing thoughts and we can just observe those. Kind of bringing down, explaining the standards that no one explains, that even bona fide Buddhist monks are doing this with 5% success at best. And that is expected. So no one's sitting there floating on, a golden mountaintop. And also finding accommodations that work for you. So I'm not saying my practice is what's going to work for you. It's something to kind of try in the laboratory of your body and mind and see, do I like it? Does it work for me? Does it make it easier in a way that I can actually access this practice from in the first place and baby step up to more, longer practices, more periods of focused attention. So the accommodations that I've come up with are movement, fidgeting, art, sensory play, and sound, but also intentional pacing for people with attention differences and PDA, and also people who have aphantasia. So this is, I think, a group that's really largely overlooked. So my mom is completely aphantasic, and I am pretty sure I am as well. It still kind of breaks my brain to think of the concept, but aphantasia is where someone can't picture something in their mind's eye. So in some meditations are asking you to visualize certain things, and some people actually can't do that. So I include little accommodations, little modifications that, okay, if you are, for example, hyperphagic, because some neurodivergent people picture things in great detail, you could focus on this. If you have trouble imagining things, we can just do this instead. So really considering all types of people and wherever they're coming to this practice from and accommodating them and making the practice less, I don't say less awful, but less intimidating because a lot of ADHD and autistic folks hear meditation and just bristle. Oh, it sounds horrible. I don't want to do that. Why would I do that? But there's so many reasons that great reasons to do this. Personally, in my life, I notice if I meditate regularly, I'm able to connect my thoughts to physical sensations and emotions in my body much more readily. And I can challenge those thoughts. And that changes how I feel in my body. And also those little moments of joy and feeling joy in my body, it happens much more often. Whereas if I don't meditate, those moments sort of pass me by and it's a bit more of a flat, you know, a bit more emotionally shut down for me if I don't do this practice. So those are a few of the I think I answered your question and then I I talked about a bunch of other things. So
Yeah.
does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been having a daily practice of meditation for probably about 4 to 5 years now.
Oh, great.
And not only I really appreciate you talking about how, like, 5% of the time, like, we're not having like thoughts where we're going somewhere else, right? And that's definitely true of myself. But I've also found that even when I find a meditation practice that is working for me, it only kind of works and flows for a certain period of time. And then I have to sort of find an adjustment to that practice. I'm wondering if you've
Mhm.
kind of experienced or seen others have similar experiences.
I mean, I have a bunch of theories on that. Maybe your brain just needs a bit of that novelty to stay engaged. For me, that's the ADHD part of the brain. Like I need something different to stay interested in this because the boredom sort of creeps in. Not that meditation is supposed to always make us feel good and calm. I mean, we could observe the boredom and have a feeling of friendliness towards the boredom, but if the boredom causes you to not do it at all, then that's something worth looking at. So I like novelty, and with my meditation practice, and this is something I've had to come to terms with, is that I think us autistic and ADHD folks have very cyclical levels of interest and engagement with things. I mean, some people can do a practice every single day and do that forever and have that be part of their routine. Whereas another group might be kind of, the two warring factions in the brain, autism, ADHD, always, slugging it out. Like, which one's going to win? Is it going to be the routine side or the novelty side, right? This is something I constantly struggle with. And it prevents me from having a regular routine because the ADHD brain doesn't like that, but the autism brain does. So I think for ADHD people, in particular, that can be hard. Although if someone has an established routine, yes, boredom can also creep in. But for me personally, yes, I also deal with this and I try to change it up. And right now I'm doing anytime, anywhere meditation. For example, when I'm working, feeling the sensations in my feet and legs, when I'm walking, even to the kitchen to get a glass of water. How does that feel in my legs? Meditating on sound when I'm with my kids at the park, just tuning into that. So these kind of little meditation snacks, if you will, throughout the day. And then if I get time for seated practice, I'll do that. walking meditation I love. So yeah, changing it up. I think everyone's different. Some people could do the same practice forever, the same meditation every day and love it. And some people need variety. But I think it's just being honest with yourself around, what keeps you engaged and not feeling shame over that somehow you're doing it wrong if you can't kind of contort yourself into this typical mold of what you should be doing and feeling. Because I think some people can use meditation as a way to further suppress themselves, particularly us neurodivergents. Okay, I need to be someone who is focused and calm. So I'm going to do this meditation so I can be better. But I think that's approaching it. I'm not saying you're approaching it in this way. I'm just saying I'm cautioning against some shame that can rise around this because we've been told our brains are, bad or broken or wrong. And just ensuring we're kind of bringing some self compassion into this and not being too perfectionistic about it. I don't meditate every day, and that's fine. Sometimes I meditate every other day. Sometimes I meditate for a week straight. Sometimes you need a couple weeks off, and that's totally fine. And that doesn't make anyone less than.
Now, in thinking about doing things differently, you've created the Mindfulness Done Differently community. Can you tell our listeners what they'll experience if they join this community?
Yeah, definitely. So this is very much a labor of love. This is something that I've created, thinking about 15 years ago, Tanya, what would she need to feel true well-being and mental health? And she was having panic attacks every day and not knowing she's neurodivergent and not having a sense of that. So really community is a safe, supportive place where autistic and ADHD people, I say, can find their peace and their people. And I think those two things are very interconnected because if you look at just our evolution wiring, if we were kicked out of the tribe, that would be a death sentence. So feeling that isolation and that lack of belonging, it really can bring the nervous system activation up. So I'm combining those two things, the meditation videos, the belonging, the community, all of it together so neurodivergent people can find their peace and their people and co-regulate with other neurodivergent. So basically what it is, it's an online platform. I share neurodivergent friendly meditations and breathwork practices. They incorporate all the things we talked about: movement, fidgeting, art, sensory play, and sound, to help fellow spicy brain folks find their zen. And I also have coursework on sensory awareness. So I put a lot of probably hundreds of hours into this sensory coursework where people can kind of map out all their 8 senses and figure out if they're over or under responsive in each sense or mixed, and have catered activities to help them meet their sensory needs. Something I feel is very, very overlooked in adults. I think if you're a neurodivergent or autistic ADHD child, they look at, occupational therapists will look at you meeting your sensory needs. Then all of a sudden, when you hit 12, you don't have sensory needs anymore. So I think that meeting your sensory needs, it goes hand in hand with feeling well and comfortable in your body. So I go into a lot of detail about that, but it's all approachable in, bite-sized videos that people can go through, sort of the self-paced coursework. And yeah, again, at the heart of it is connection. I have 2 support calls a week. One is general sharing, and one is a call where we can all meditate live together and turn our cameras off or on, participate if we like, or just listen and stay quiet. And there's the community forum where people could do sharing, give and get support, things like that. And that's what it is so far. I'm really proud of it. And I think it's a great resource. I would have loved to have this, 10, 15 years ago.
Now, beyond meditation, you write clever content that helps tech and software companies. I'm wondering, are there any ways that meditation might help you to better write content that helps these companies?
Definitely. I think meditation helps me in every area of my life and certainly professionally because it makes me more creative, more calm. And in my line of work, there's a lot of tight deadlines, a lot of face to face client meetings, video calls, a lot of creative problem solving, a lot of context switching, a lot of things that could cause sensory social overload if I don't approach it very intentionally and have a good self care practice. So I'd say the meditation helps me grounded along with other things. Meditation is not the only thing I do. I do weekly therapy. I do exercise and nature walks, which is very important for me, and then meeting my sensory needs. So kind of combined all together, those things help me, I think, connect my thoughts to my feelings so I can catch the spiral before it begins. And it helps give me focus and creativity, and two things that are essential in my field. So essentially, it just helps me tune into myself better, tune into my clients, my creativity, and avoid burnout, if I'm being honest.
I read that you help companies grow an audience and bring in customers, even if they don't have an email list or a single lead. Where do you start with companies and attracting customers in situations like these?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working less with small companies these days and more with larger corporations and tech clients, but I'd say all of it, good marketing boils down to empathy. And it's the same way I approach meditation, empathy and accessibility. So I try to understand what the audience wants, what they actually care about and need, and I try to understand how they feel when they come across a piece of content. So I never want to bore anyone. I want to tell a story. I want to keep everyone entertained. But I also have empathy for the fact that these are busy professionals and they need the information they're looking for quickly. And I do write for different attention spans. I'm always cognizant of that. Is someone who's reading this ADHD, I try to make it scannable, have headlines and longer text where appropriate, shorter text where appropriate, bulleted lists, things like that. I'm always considering neurodivergence when I'm writing my content and balancing visuals with text. But most of all, just in everything I do, I try to bring empathy into everything I do because marketing really is about empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, understanding what they want and need, and helping them understand how you can get them there. And with meditation, the empathy translates into making it accessible for neurodivergent audiences. So I think there's a lot of overlaps there.
And how can our listeners learn about you beyond this interview?
Yeah, so the best place to learn about me and the community I run is mindfullydifferent.ca. So it's mindfullydifferent.ca. And so there, your listeners, they can find, like I said, the neurodivergent friendly meditation, sensory coursework. I also have ASMR videos. We didn't talk about that, but that's a nice little bonus, little cherry on top. And then again, the vibrant community of supportive autistic and ADHD folks, and just a little bit more about my backstory. And if your listeners want to try it out, they can use the code Autism Stories. So that's all caps, one word, at checkout to get their first 30 days for free to give it a spin or give it a whirl. I guess that's the saying. I use a lot of expressions, which is hilarious for an autistic person.
Well, it was wonderful to have you on Autism Stories today. Thanks so much for sharing your story. And I always love talking about meditation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Doug. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Tanya for the conversation. To learn more about Tanya, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to what has been your biggest struggle with meditation. Has anything been helpful in overcoming this? Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to be the best version of their authentic selves through customized life coaching and community groups. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.